Start recording. All right. Well, welcome everyone to our official launch party of the Coaching Many podcast. My name is Jennifer Britton, and I'm excited to be co-hosting with Evana Valle. And this is a new podcast. It actually just released first episode last week. 12:30 Eastern today will be the YouTube launch. So I will stay on and do an official separate recording for that. So Evana, at 12 noon ET today.
Yeah.
What are you excited about? We're here. What are you excited about in the new space for you of podcasting?
I think it's really around that shared mission of just like bringing more of this message. Hi, Mona Lisa. Great to see you. Just expanding this conversation of possibility in a coaching many realm. And it can look so many different ways, whether it be groups or teams or even just conversations around the kitchen table. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't need to be this big thing. And it's just like, how do we connect, and how does the principles that you have done so much work around, how can we get these messages so out there so that way we can build more effective families and more effective teams and more effective groups, to support one another and build one another. And that's my passion in this conversation, really, because I see it in my own work.
And I hear the passion coming through. And so, again, one of the things that I think was important for us is to really expand the conversation. And that's like podcasts. Podcasts go everywhere. They go in our ears, they go on the road, they go to the beach, they go to the lake. And today we wanted to really bring it out to the world. As I said, our first episode released last week on Apple. A little bit about what we're going to be doing. And like any creative project, this is going to evolve as we grow. So here's our sort of like bumper, as we call it. So in the Coaching Many podcast, we explore coaching many as it relates to conversations, connections, and change. So the 3 C's in both personal and professional settings. As you heard from Evana, our work takes us to different spaces, but I think this is going to be something that you'll find useful if you're working in career coaching as well as organizational coaching. Maybe you're working with communities or you're working with a family. So this podcast, I think, will be of interest not only to formal group and team coaches, but peer coaches and even leaders leveraging coaching, really, looking at how do we bring the coaching conversation to many. And I love what you said, Evana. This is Ivana's line. Coaching many is about creating empowering and thought-provoking spaces for conversation which strengthen both relationships and enhance results. And so our commitment to listeners is in the podcast, we're going to be sharing best-in-class tools, practices, and approaches to support your conversations. So we've been recording for a while. We've now done 4 recordings. They'll come out to you. We're going to batch our first few, so you'll have a number in the hopper in the next week or 2, and then we'll be going to a bi-weekly rhythm. And Evana, I have to say, as this being my second podcast, so excited to be partnering with you because it's a different rhythm. I love the 3 C's, our conversations, connections, and change. So over to you. What are you enjoying about the process so far?
Oh, wow. What am I enjoying about the process is just the active conversation. It's like, as much as, I teach group coaching essentials and practicum, and as much as I'm doing my own group programs, it's another like dimension of engagement when I get to sit with you, Jennifer, the maven, the woman who wrote the first book on group coaching. And I've lost track of how many books you've actually written. So excuse my, I just can't keep up. 7 books. And so here I am, like, part of me is like, it's also elevating my conversation and my growth. And I think that's a big part of what we're offering through this podcast is a space, a circle for whether you're a coach, whether you even have considered doing group or team coaching. It's just like, how do we keep our saw sharp? And so to me, this is what's exciting me, because I get to sit with you, who I have so much respect for and regard for, and keep sharpening my saw while sharing my my sharpness wherever I'm sharp, or strong. And I think that's just that cycle of reciprocity that gets to be offered and extended in this conversation.
Yeah. And it is truly a conversation, which is why we wanted to do like a last minute launch party, because we hope that this
Yes.
is going to spark insights and conversations for you, right? Like, I really think these three C's are critical. Our work, my work, really has always been about how do we have one conversation better at a time. But it's also
Yeah.
about connectivity. And that's the thing that I really love about podcasts, is it really is about connection. Now, someone who is not here but has had a footprint or a fingerprint all over the podcast so far is Michelle Mullins.
Hmm.
And many of you would have met Michelle already if you listened to my first podcast. And Michelle and I co-hosted the Remote Pathways podcast for about 3 years. We actually launched the podcast before the pandemic, before remote work became a thing. And I reached out to Michelle in the summer of 2019 saying, Michelle, I know you do a lot of work around voice. Would you co-host a podcast with me? And she jumped in feet first. Michelle is actually working in the background of this
Hmm.
podcast with
Thank you,
Evana and
Michelle.
I. Yeah, big thanks to Michelle. She is our producer. And so it's really fun. A lot of the graphics, a lot of what I think Michelle is bringing out in both Ivana and I is because of Michelle's amazing ear and eye for seeing what makes things unique. So I do want to also acknowledge, yes, Ivana and I are the co-hosts, but Michelle Mullins is in the backdrop. She's a very seasoned podcaster. And what I love, and I've been reminded of this in the last month or two, as we've really been bringing this creative project to fruit, is just podcasts find their own life, right? They find their own listeners. So we hope that you'll be sharing this with people in your network that would enjoy this. As we said, part of this work is about expanding the coaching conversation. When I first came to coaching 22 years ago, it was about how could I bring coaching to the masses? And my hope is that there will be listeners, people with people and from people that I've worked with all over the world, because I know
Hmm.
that radio podcasting goes places that the internet can't go. So with that, here's a bit of the backstory. If you haven't found it yet, we brought out some of the connection pieces. So Apple, for those that are Apple users, it's that was sort of like the first of the dominoes, and you can find it under the podcast listing. That's our ID there. We're also hosting this on YouTube. So YouTube now has sort of become the next best, and you can find it under the Effective Group Coach podcast listing. What I love is that Audible has jumped into the game of podcasting, and we're now on Audible, which you can download for free. Audible is country by country, so you will see it under the audible.ca. You're also going to see it under the Italian or IT, because that is where Ivana is based as well. So I just think it's sort of interesting how podcasting too throughout the world takes on a different sort of measure. Now, Michelle is great. So she's given us a whole list. So I'm going to leave this up because maybe you like to listen on Spotify. Maybe you are on Player FM, Deezer. You can see that we've been doing this for a few years. And so some of these age us as podcasters, but others are just new links. So with that, Ivana, what is your commitment? Like, again, we've talked a lot about together about what our commitment is to our listeners. What is your commitment as it relates to the Coaching Many podcast and where we're going and growing?
My commitment is really to bring my best self, and also to really invite our listeners to really allow themselves to show up and who they are and take what they really can get most value, because there's a lot of there's a lot happening in our 30-minute sound bites. And so my commitment is that each person gets something, a nugget that they can leave each episode from, um, and either deepen their being, have some reflection on something, or even support them in their own business goals, and that might mean like looking at our programming at Potentials Realized and how can I stretch my strength and my muscle, or just how can I actually bring more of myself and more in my game into my coaching. And I don't care if you do group, team, or one-on-one, because there's so much value in what we're offering. So that's my commitment, is that everyone gets to leave with one nugget in choosing to listen to an episode.
Love that.
How about
Love
you,
it.
Jen?
Great question. Well, I think it's somewhat aligned, very similar, right? But my commitment is also to really make this work accessible. As many of you know, it's been 11 years now. Can't believe it, since my second book, From One to Many, Best Practices for Group and Team Coaching, came out, which sparked this term, coaching many. So for the last decade, I've been talking to
Yeah.
this ICF chapter, that conference, this professional group on coaching many. And I really, again, I think the evolution is now where it's like, how do we magnify this? How do we amplify the term? Because coaching is no longer just a one-on-one. People recognize that it's needed to really affect change. We need to expand this. So my hope is, and my commitment is, to bring interesting, different ideas, different sort of focus areas to make this work more accessible. And for those that are really interested in going a bit deeper, we hope that you'll join us at Group Coaching Essentials through our programming at Potentials Realized, because we've grown since 2006, right? I first offered Group Coaching Essentials January 2006. It's been offered every month over the last 18 years now. And what we're seeing is, like, we're really at a critical mass where group coaching is accepted. It's like, oh yeah, but of course you would work with the group. But that is still within a very echelon. So I think this podcast is really going to bring it out to the masses. And that's my hope. My hope is also that this is going to be a creative element. So you've probably seen my favorite. I love to really look at how do we engage people, but we also wanted to talk about some of the things that we're going to be looking at. This is a new word search for the Coaching Many podcast. If you're here with us live, we'll invite you to grab your pen using annotation and circle with us some of these words that you're going to see and hear in the podcast itself. Because coaching many, whether we're working with a group, whether we're working with a team, a community, a group of peers, it's all about dialogue. It's all about how do we spark conversation. What's been challenging, I think, in 2024, we very much live in an asynchronous world. And it'll be great if you're joining us asynchronously, but it's so much harder to get people at the table than it has been for the last few years. So I wanted to start with dialogue. And then one ode to Evana. If you haven't met Evana and I before at Potentials Realized, what I love about working with Evana as a team member is she's so different from what I bring. And so when I think about words like awareness and embodiment, those are an ode to you, Evana. So if you can see any of these, please feel free to circle them. I like using word searches because it gets us thinking, it gets us active on the screen. Thank you, Stephanie Burke, for putting that on. What are the other words? Again, our readers, our listeners could probably listen in, but what are some of the words that jump out for you, Evana, as we've been recording these different calls?
Yeah, well, I think I circled the first one, which is always the area that I bring balance to you, because you do embodiment, but thank you for that acknowledgement. But you are the one who drives results. And so I think my eye went to that. And even when I look at like the momentum we've had in the podcast, the momentum we've had in Potentials Realize, working together there, but also just your new products that you bring into market every place. Like, you're a demonstration of a business leader. And to me, like, that's part of what results are. Like, we're trained coaches, but for the impact that we want to have in the world, it's also about results and really getting intentional on what are your goals and what is your focus, because we can't do everything for everyone, including what we have for ourselves. So that's just me on my little tangent. And I think another one, and we actually the one we recorded today was around relationships and results. So, you're strong in all of it. And my area of focus really is relationships, and how do we deepen those relationships, and how do we even build relationships so they're effective, and so they can actually be empowering to us as we embark on change, as we're going through, because a lot of the work that I do really revolves around supporting women, many who are leaders, but going through a personal relationship transition, a breakup, a divorce. So how can we actually, like, part of that connection, part of that conversations is supporting our participants and actually knowing, what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that taste like? What does that experience of that? And so that's what's really kind of getting me activated right now. And as we record more of these episodes, as I was saying to Jen earlier, like, we are on a roll. Like, let's keep this momentum, because as we do that, and I think it also is taking a step back, like, even for us as coaches and business leaders, right? As we have a very clear vision and what our commitment is to these visions, to our vision rather, then that's how momentum happens. We have to embody it, but we can't just embody stuff without actually taking some action, without taking some, to get those results.
And I think what you're, to be generative, right, which is another word in this little map here, it really is about hopefully sparking all of you into some sort of action. What's the one thing you might put into play? How might you even like look up wordsearch.com? Oh, hey, I could create my own, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
we need to continue to innovate and experiment in the space of group coaching and team coaching, even though it's sort of like, oh, there's a history, but a very young history. And the needs of our clients and the very diverse clients that we all serve around the world is very different. I've been sharing this a lot with different people. I think one of the post-pandemic realities is there's a flattening of the algorithm. And when I say a flattening of the algorithm, it's like in a growing field like group coaching or team coaching, it's like this is the one way to do it. No, there's multiple ways to be doing
Mm-hmm.
things. And so my hope, and I think our hope, is that we really do, as Evana said, activate and spark some new action on the part of coaches around the world, whether you wear the formal hat of coach or whether maybe you're a leader bringing coaching skills into your
Mm-hmm.
organization, because it is change and it is about, doing things differently and doing it in a way that is memorable and impactful for the people you serve.
Yeah, you know what's coming to me, Jen, as you say that, is that whole ripple effect, which is like the embodiment, we'll say, of potentials realized,
Yeah.
right? Is that ripple effect. And for me, it's like, as we have these conversations, again, whether it's at our own kitchen tables with our family or in our professional lives, or however that whatever that looks like for each of us, we do have that ripple effect, because no matter, as coaches, this is my own personal opinion, is no matter what angle, however you're connecting with people and having those transformational conversations, which is, I think, what the power of coaching really offers, whether it be one-on-one, group, or team, it is that ripple effect, but it allows that ripple effect to go beyond your conversation. It's what happens beyond the screen or beyond that office appointment, however you want to call it. And I think that's the power, that's the generative that sometimes I think we actually, I know I'll speak for myself, sometimes I take for granted. I take for granted until I hear it from others who I have done some coaching with, of peers, colleagues, going, wow, like, this is transformational. I can't believe how much this person is actually stepping into who they are.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes as coaches, and I'll pass it back to you, is sometimes I think we take for granted the possibility that we actually put in others and the generative impact, that ripple effect we actually have. And that's, I think, really empowering as coaches.
And,
Yeah.
and thank you for really, pointing us to that. I think about so much of the work that I've done in organizations, training leaders as coaches, right? And what I've consistently heard over the years is this stuff really works, Jen. It's not just working for me as a leader, but I'm taking it at home. Like, am I allowed to take this stuff home and use it as
Yeah.
a parent? It's like, of course. And, when I started this business 22 years ago, and even before then, I really had this, I'd received some coaching as a young coaching student when I was still a leader. And this notion of the ripple effect really came out because my work across my whole lifespan has been about how do I affect change that is much greater than me by activating others. And truly, I think this is another piece of the puzzle. I think it really is another iteration. So we hope that you enjoy this. We do hope that you also will let us know what are the topics you want. So these are some of the sort of like meta topics that we're going to be looking at. I'm going to stop the share and clear the screen because we want to share just a couple more things as well with you since you've made time today to be with us. That being the links in, right? So yeah, some days I've forgotten how many books I've written as well. But a lot of this, was sparked by the puzzle piece, the missing or the different puzzle piece of From One to Many, which came out in 2012. What's interesting, in 2018, Choice Magazine did a great edition, and I worked alongside Gary Schleifer, who is the publisher. He asked me, he said, we want to pull an edition together looking at team and group coaching. And so the tagline for that was The Landscape of Coaching Many.
Mm.
And I went back to sort of see who had written for that. So we had people like Phil Lanier. If you've never met Philip, he is in Montreal. He does a great set of work around the sort of the work and the body of work of Henry Mintzberg, who many of you are probably very familiar with. And Philip, his company is called Coaching Ourselves. So they've taken sort of coaching into a very peer-based relationship. And as I looked at the other authors who came on to that journal edition, it really is another way to look at how Coaching Many has gone out into the ecosystem. What I've been surprised with and really pleased about, and that's why I put the TEDx Trinity Bellwood. It was less than 18 months ago that I did my second TED Talk in downtown Toronto, and it's called Coaching Teams Through Chaos. And almost 32,000 people have now viewed that. I get emails on a regular basis from people saying, this concept, this notion of the 6 factors of high-performing teams, and the notion that we have different work styles is really having an influence. And I was like, wow, that's really neat and nice, until I went to Bing. And I went to Bing yesterday. As we know, AI is everywhere. And I was like, I wonder what they say. What does Bing say about my work? So here's what Bing now has in the Bingosphere about me. And it talks about my TED Talk. So this is exactly it. The TED Talk, Coaching Teams Through Chaos, almost was termed the what and the who of team coaching. And then I said to the organizer, I said, I think that's not sexy enough. I want the coaching, embracing the chaos part of it. But what is interesting is very much it is about the results. It is also about the relationships that you heard from Evana. And very much we hope that this is going to bring to life for you as a listener what group and team coaching and Coaching Many can look like, all its derivatives. So in a short while, in 4 minutes, it's going to launch on YouTube. Only YouTube can launch in the way YouTube launches. I'm going to stop my share. We're going to stop this recording, and then I'm going to open it up and go to YouTube. Again, it's more sentimental and ceremonial than anything else. But as I know with all my work, whether it was book one or other creative projects take a life of their own, and you never know what will happen. So my hope is that aspirationally, it's going to have it's going to spark a lot of conversation for others. Evana, do you want to talk a little bit about either the spark or the topics ahead, what people can expect as they listen in? Oh, we've got you on mute.
I'm on mute. What I did, gals who are on here, is I actually put our YouTube playlist channel in the chat. So if you want to, because I know we're dropping off in a minute, you can click on that and be already on the launch party with us there. So with that said, like with the spark, Jen, you kind of put me on the spot with this when I have to be completely transparent. I think for me, the spark that I'm excited about is really taking some of these fundamental things that maybe even I have taken for granted as a coach who's been coaching for the last 10 years, and really coming back to the grassroots of what makes coaching, one-on-one, group, or team, really that magnificent, that transformational piece. So we're going to be talking about stuff like goals and accountability and awareness and action. We're going to be, but I think we also want to know from all of you, whether you're catching this on the replay or even if you're in the room now, put it in chat. What is it that you want to actually have us talk about? what are those things that are burning inside you or the challenges you're having? Because the podcast is only as good as the feedback we're receiving. So I think the spark for me, part of the spark is actually getting the involvement of our listeners and our communities to share with us what is actually happening out there, and how can we support whatever that looks like in this conversation.
And just in 1 minute, I'll say again, thank you for taking time, because sometimes it feels like a bit of a maze, which is why I chose this. But our hope is that, through a podcast, people are going to hear it in different ways. And maybe it's just the one thing they need to turn a different direction. Again, it's about connections, it's about change, and we're going to have a lot of fun along the way. So thank you for joining us on our Tuesday timeframe. We are going to continue our regular community calls, which happen bi-weekly at a different Zoom line on Tuesdays. And what is important is anytime, come and join us. We'll dedicate some to the Coaching Many podcast, and others, you'll just see us online. So thank you for inputting as well. We've got a couple of ideas. Yeah, family meetings, blended families. And thank you, Mona Lisa, for the congratulations. We've also got Stephanie saying how to use group coaching as part of business building. Much success. And Kathleen, I'm glad she was here as well. And also you, Dawn, good to see you as well. Dawn says, thank you for this. Love the intention here and excited with how we're making these concepts real in our work and lives. A recent work meeting brought to the necessity for fostering relational organization. So we're glad we're on the mark. I'm going to stop this recording, and then we're going to start the new one for the launch party. So please join us over on YouTube, which might have already started the launch. Drum roll, please. And Evana, thank you for partnering with me
Thank you.
on this today. So I'm going to stop this, and then I am going to start a recording. I'll stay on this line as well if you want to stay with me and watch it. All right. Thanks, everyone.